Taxi, Uber, Lyft drivers of Reddit, what are the most interesting, entertaining, fricked up situations that happened to you during the shift? I picked up 4 guys wearing neon green tutus. The guy in the front seat looks at me while I'm driving and says, "Don't do drugs," then proceeds to snort C from some sort of vial. I smiled and said, "Please don't do drugs in my car." Stone cold reply, "I like it." I was unemployed at the time. Quit a job due to an abusive, toxic work environment. Had recently graduated a coding boot camp but wasn't having any luck landing new opportunities. Bills were piling up, and honestly I was losing hope. I'm about to call it a night. Driving drunks around gets tiring when I decide what's one more. Turns out these 3 older women wanted to do some gambling in the next state over and had trouble finding a ride. I said yes. Figured I'd just call it a night after. We get talking. Turns out one of them is an IT consultant. They decide to pay me basically $100 an hour to hang out till they are done and drive them all home. We ended up connecting. She revised my resume and put me in touch with some references of hers. I ended up making a good buck off the fares alone, and also ended up completely turning my life around by landing a dream job with a little bit of help. I wrote her a sincere thank you once I accepted the new offer, and she replied with, "Help others because you can." Not a day goes by where I don't think about how lucky I am. This is amazing and gives me hope for the future. I used to drive Uber at Fort Myers Beach. I picked up 4 drunk as a skunk middle-aged people and crammed them into my tiny car. I was about to pull into their neighborhood. Nice. Gated. On the water. And the one guy was like, "I need you to follow that car," and I'm like, "Whatever. Let's see how this plays out." So we start following this random SUV and I'm like, "Who is this guy?" And they're like, "We don't know, but we have 20 minutes of babysitter left and we aren't wasting it." I reminded them they were on triple rate surcharge and they literally didn't care. Eventually the car pulled over and everyone shouts at me, "Go go go," and we sped off into the night. $100 ride, $20 tip, 5-star review, 100% worth it. Entertaining drunk, otherwise responsible people is a blast. You absolutely milk every last minute of babysitter time. That crap is sacred. Friend of mine visiting NYC took a taxi back to his hotel late night. Riding in the back he found a small women's clutch purse thing. Inside was the ad of a 19-year-old girl and the business card of a police officer in a town neighboring state. The police officer had the same last name as the girl, so my friend figured the officer was the girl's father and she carried the card in case she ever needed to get herself out of a traffic ticket or something. My friend figures he can leave a voicemail on the officer's business number when he gets back to the hotel, then leave the purse at the hotel front desk for the girl to come pick up. So that is exactly what he does as soon as he gets up to the hotel room. About 3 hours later, now 3 or 4 am, he is in a deep sleep when loud knocks on his hotel room door wake him up. It's a bunch of NYPD detectives who want to know all the details of how he found the purse, like where he originally hailed the cab, etc. Turns out the girl was indeed the daughter of the cop on the business card, and she had been missing for a few days. The discovery of her clutch purse was the first sign of her that had popped up. My friend had paid for the cab via credit card and had kept the receipt, so he was able to pass that along to the detectives who, presumably, were able to use that to track down the cab driver and find out any information he could provide. Ultimately my friend doesn't know what happened. The cops never contacted him again. This has to be the craziest story on this thread so far. I really hope the police found the girl, because that's heartbreaking. I picked up a guy who either refused to pay her from the night before or didn't know she was a lady of the night. She proceeded to follow us. Finally he gets a call from someone. Seemed like it scared him because he told me to bring him back to his place. She followed us back there. I promptly left. Probably should have kicked him out sooner. My most memorable would be, I picked up a girl coming home from work. We started talking about my education and what I did before Uber, and it just turned out that her company was looking for my skills. She gave me her card. I shot her my resume and 2 years later I'm still working for that company and have been promoted to a junior executive LVL. I've never had to drive an Uber since. The rideshare driver's secret dream. Drove for Uber for a bit. Once picked up this guy who ended up being a magician. It's 2 a.m. and had to drive him into Manhattan to his apartment. It was weird cause nobody was around. The city was dead quiet for some reason. He sat in the front seat and told me stories the whole ride there. Once there he told me to get out and did a magic trick for me. He made 4 $100 bills turn into $4 bills and gave me it for a tip. I drove a taxi in a suburb of Boston for a while in the 80s. One day, a kid in his 20s with a baseball bat hailed me and asked me to take him to a pharmacy nearby. It was the middle of the day, so I assumed he was coming from softball practice. He told me to wait. Then he went into the pharmacy and left the bat in the car. A minute or two later, he came running out of the pharmacy with the pharmacist right behind him. Was this guy nuts? What kind of criminal uses a cab as a getaway car? I casually reached back and locked the door just as he reached the cab. He fumbled with the handle, realizing that he left his only defensive weapon inside, and then ran off. I let the pharmacist into the cab, and then the two of us made a slow pursuit of the guy, while reporting his location over the radio. No cell phones. Eventually, he was so exhausted that I got out of the cab and held him until the police arrived. I had to testify in court and identify him. Not the sharpest tool in the shed. I have a great mental image of you driving behind him with the Benny Hill music playing and it getting slower and slower as the dude gets more and more out of breath. Back in the 70s as a student I drove a taxi in the weekends and some evenings nights to earn some extra money. One time, late at night I got a call to pick a guy up at his home. At arrival the guy hops in the back with a sports bag with few rifles sticking out. I could see that in my rear view mirror. He wanted me to drive out of town to some B road and in the middle of nowhere he told me to stop the car on a small road in an area with a lot of trees. Hopped out of the car with his bag. Came back few minutes later without the bag and told me to head back to his place and drop him off. He gave me a huge tip and this is the first time I ever mentioned this happened. Maybe he was just dropping off his rifles at his hunting lodge. Not me, but my mom. She was delivering Uber Eats last winter to some guy a little out of town. The location was a bit odd, but she went with it. Just outside our city on one of the side roads by some train tracks she parked her car and looked around for any houses. None. There was a train stopped nearby and suddenly my mom noticed a guy waddling through the deep snow towards her. "Are you?" Random name. Calling him Bob. Bob he nodded. Took the food and waddled towards the train. Suddenly it starts up and continues down the tracks. This guy deadass ordered Uber Eats while conducting a train. I work with the railroad. Trains can get stopped for hours on end, usually waiting for a train to pass in the opposite direction as not all lines have two-way tracks. Picked a guy up from a strip club around 5 p.m. He had clearly been there for a while and was talkative drunk. He started talking to a friend on his phone and kept saying he couldn't go into detail because he had a lady driver. He told me he was going home and then taking his daughter out to a basketball game because there was an after game concert she was very excited about. Little did he know, or I know because I was just following the GPS, that he had been routed to her high school. Dude's in a rumpled suit, smells like strip club, and is clearly not sober. He got a resolved look, handed me a few singles, said thanks for the ride boo, and just hitched up his pants like a man embracing his crappy situation. This makes me kinda sad. I drove for Uber and Lyft for a short time. There was one situation I will never forget. I was driving downtown DSM and picked up a gentleman who was just getting out of the Cubs game. He was loaded down with Cubs gear. He told me about $400 worth and was absolutely trashed from drinking all day at the game. The first thing he says when he gets in is, "I know my destination is X, but I need to go to my hotel first to put all this stuff away." I say, "No problem," and he lets me know how appreciative he is and he will make it worth my time. I honestly didn't mind waiting because the ride was still active, so I was still making money. He gets back in the car and we start heading toward his original destination, about 30 minutes away. We get to talking and apparently he is a beverage distributor for a company in CA. He is doing some sales in the area and asks me if I like to drink. I told him I do on occasion, to which he replies, "Do you like vodka?" and passes a full bottle of vodka to me in the driver's seat. It was sealed, thank God. He told me it was a new kind of vodka that he was trying to get on the shelves of some local bars because this vodka was originally created by some ISU students. When we arrived at the destination, he thanked me again for going out of my way to drop him off and let me keep the bottle as a tip. Definitely one to remember. The last Uber rider I ever picked up was a teenage kid, maybe 16ish, and what I would assume was his girlfriend. They got in the backseat and after a few minutes started to hear some unsettling sounds. Look back and she is straight up blowing him in my backseat. It was like 3 in the afternoon and I picked them up from the mall. Who does that? Picked up 2 guys from a hotel. Destination is in the Hollywood Hills. When we're navigating up the winding roads of the hills, one of the guys mentions that he hates going to famous football player's house because he always gets a little car sick. He tells me he knows this player because he plays for the famous player's alma mater and is in town to work out for the NFL draft that year. This house is at the top of a hill with a beautiful view. When we get there, the drafted asks me to wait for a couple minutes and he enters the house. After a while, he gets back in the car and tells me I'm gonna follow 3 other cars to Six Flags. The first car is a big, black Suburban followed by 2 luxury German sedans and here I am with my economy car with an Uber sticker on it. I matched with a girl on Tinder by accident, and she messaged me saying she liked PBR, which is in one of my pictures. Being awkward and not wanting to waste her time, I just unmatched without saying anything. Around this time I was near the beginning of my brief tenure as an Uber driver, and who the frick do you think I pick up the very next day? I immediately try to slouch hoping she doesn't recognize me, and after 5 minutes of silence, right when I think I'm in the clear, she says, "Hey, did we match on Tinder?" To which I reply, "I don't think so." Then she says, "Yeah, I messaged you about PBR and then you unmatched me." And I just let out a feeble kind of "oh." Yeah, then I look down at my GPS, and there's 25 minutes left in this ride. I did not get a tip. Oh man, I bet you got cramps from cringing so hard. I used a Uber Lyft in Vermont. Picked up 4 20-something-year-old kids from New York who were visiting Burlington. I drove them back to their Airbnb in Stowe, a little less than an hour away. We are having a great time, doing sing-alongs to David Bowie. I get to Stowe and the GPS is leading me off the main road. Then I turn again onto a dirt road and then another dirt road. It's like 11 PM and I don't see a single light from a house, a car, or a street light anywhere. I jokingly say, "Man, where are you guys taking me?" One guy replies, "This is where we are going to kill you." Mind you, I have a twisted sense of humor and have actually used this as a joke when I first met the woman who is now my wife. But I immediately followed it up with joking and laughter. I share this with my passengers, and another one replies, "Well, we really are just going to skin you alive." At this point, I ask them to please stop messing with me and that the joke is lost at this point. I kid you not. Someone replies, "Don't worry, we'll make sure we put olive oil all over your skin so it doesn't dry out." Finally we get to the location and they invite me in for a beer. I decline. In fact, I declined to pull in the driveway. As they were getting out of the car, someone dropped their jewel in the car and needed help finding that. No chance in heck I was going to help them find it, as I wanted to be ready to bolt at a moment's notice and I wasn't going to put myself in any vulnerable situations. I went home after that one. I'm a pretty big guy, so it takes a lot for me to feel unsafe, but this was one time where I was absolutely terrified being an Uber driver. Not a driver, but was recently a passenger in an Uber. It was a Monday morning, so of course I was a little down and not in the mood to talk too much. The driver starts going on about how beautiful the weather is and starts explaining a good day starts with being positive. She then asked if I would like to see her book. I was a little confused, but I said sure. She starts explaining that she carries this scrapbook with index cards and markers for all of her riders. She said she usually asks them to write some sort of positive message or just tells them they can simply write whatever they want. This book was filled with notes from people where we live, outside of the area, and even from people traveling from outside of the country. Some writing uplifting messages, some writing random funny lines, some drunks scribbling support for our sports teams. Just so many different messages from so many random people on different walks in life. Before I got out, I told her how the messages completely turned my Monday around for the better and I really appreciate what she does. She simply said, if she can bring a smile to someone's face, her day is made. I now always hope that I have the same driver whenever I request an Uber so I get a chance to continue reading the book of positivity. That was surprisingly wholesome. I'm not a driver, but a drive told me this story once. This guy called an Uber, asked the guy just to drive. He lied in the back seat, eventually asked him to drive him to Santosa Beach near Sao Paulo. I'm Brazilian. He drove around there for a while. They stopped for some coconut water and the guy eventually paid for the gas because the tank was emptying. The guy was just sad because he broke up with his girlfriend and wanted to get out of his house. The fare was around 1200 reais. The fare was around 1200 reais. That's $312 for anyone who wants to know. Probably not what you wanted to read, but I've read a book of a taxi driver full of stories like this. One was a couple directing the driver deeper and deeper into the woods, then down a side road close to the autobahn, at which point he initiated his silent alarm. There the couple found what they were looking for, a small cross with burned out candles around. It was where they had lost their infant daughter in a car crash. On the autobahn next to it, the driver averted his alarm while they put up new candles. Not a driver but a pretty frequent Uber Lyft customer. So I was going up to my buddy's house in NH and it was 25-minute drive and me and the driver started talking. I asked him basically this exact question. My Lyft driver said one day late at night he picked up two dudes in Boston. They were both pretty drunk or high. One dude is in the front seat and one is the back. The guy up front starts fiddling with something in his pocket. His friend tells him to stop and just wait nervously. The dude in the front seat proceeds to pull out some C and a credit card and proceeds to do it on the dashboard. The driver looks over and freaks out and tells him to put away his stuff or he kicks them out of the car. He puts it away. The dudes get dropped off and the driver proceeds to call Lyft support. He basically says the did coke off my dashboard don't accept his credit card anymore. Bonus story. While going to work I asked another driver this question. The driver said a bunch of guys were having a bachelor party. They were super cool and excited, hitting the strip club and the bars and they already pre-gamed. These bros were such bros that they straight up invited the driver to party with them. The driver said okay. He partied with them all night long after closing the app and I think he might be friends with some of them now. He said he had an awesome time and so did the guy who was gonna get married. He brought them all around and they had an awesome time. I'm a driver myself, but just yesterday I heard a story from a passenger that was pretty great. He's in tampon business and he and his boss get into an Uber on the way to some business meeting. He says dude, his Uber driver, seems kinda shady but it's Tampa so he guesses it's just normal. As they get on the freeway the driver sideswipes this lady, and they have to pull off in what is assumed to be exchanging of info or whatever they have to do after an accident happens. He just sees the driver talking to this lady for maybe 30 seconds and then the driver gets back in the car and speeds off. They're thinking that was really fast for an exchange of insurance information after a fairly significant collision. When in the rear view mirror they see cop lights flashing in the car they sideswiped also chasing them down. The driver lets out an exasperated sigh and pulls over again. He starts yelling at the passengers being like you cancelled the ride. Get out of my car. He gets out and has to start talking to the cop. The guys now come to the realization that they're not making their meeting and the whole situation is fricked and they start laughing about the absurdity of it all when all of a sudden they look over and the lady who got sideswiped is now out on the side of the freeway, in the rain, in a house shirt and a shower cap over her hair, screaming at them. She's calling them freaking buttholes and other names and they're just like hey sorry lady we're just passengers in an Uber. Her tone changes and she warms up a bit. She thought they were making fun of her and they were friends with the Uber driver. Then they look over and see that said driver is now being arrested. They're on the side of the freeway in the rain with no way to get to their meeting or to even call another Uber because they can't set a pickup location in the freeway. They ask the officer if he can at least take them to the next exit and the cop is like it's not my problem. Figure it out. I'm late for court. They end up getting a ride from the lady who got hit to the nearest gas station. Moral of the story is don't go to Florida, I guess. This is such a Florida thing to happen to them lol. not a driver, but one time my friend and I, both mid-20s F, went to a bar and immediately were approached by 3 very intoxicated 40-something-year-old men. They asked if we could give them a ride to a nearby hotel. And when we hesitated they said they'd give $20 and that the bartender could vouch they were good people. I guess one guy was his cousin. The hotel was less than a mile away, so we said frick it and agreed. At that point they called over a 4th guy, and all came out to pile in my car. Now, my car is a subcompact hatchback and there's 6 people piling in. No way were we getting a 4th full-grown man in the back seat, so being a hatchback he just put him in the trunk. As we're driving there, they're doing their drunken banter when one of them goes, "Are you guys Uber?" The guy in the trunk responds, "I'm in the freaking trunk and you're asking if they're Uber." I died laughing. Totally worth it. I was driving on Halloween in a relatively small coastal city and had to pick up a couple from a local hotel. The woman was dressed in a long button-down jacket that was tightly closed, fishnet pantyhose, and stilettos. Dude was dressed in sweatpants and was also in a button-up long coat, but I could see something black and shiny around both of his wrists and at his collar. It was around 76 degrees out, so I knew they weren't dressed for the weather. I thought, okay, maybe just a weird Halloween couple's costume, it's fine. I picked them up and made small talk as I drove them to an industrial complex in a small community just outside of the city. They were traveling here from Florida and just meeting up with some friends for a Halloween party. Only thing super weird about them so far was their clothing choices. We pull up to the drop-off location and it's a small strip mall with doctors' offices and a small businesses, but at the end, there's a door with a bright red heart symbol with a devil's tail. I then notice the other people getting out of cars and walking up. Most of the women were dressed as nuns, teachers, librarians, pretty much every fetish you can name. Some of the men were in leather assless chaps, a gimp suit, and one dude was already stripping buck naked in the parking lot. The couple grinned at me, tossed me a $20 tip, and pretty much ran in the building. 99% certain dude was wearing a leather bodysuit and woman wasn't wearing much of anything. That was my first time delivering people to the local swingers club. Now, I pretty much have their schedule memorized and try to be on the other side of town when the events end. Yes, that is why you memorized the schedule. This didn't happen to me. A friend of mine drives for Uber and picked up a girl on her way home from a night out. She was in the backseat and he assumed she was sleeping. Turns out she had overdosed and died whilst he was driving her home. Super depressing. Had a former NFL player live tweet from my backseat that he wanted to punch me in the mouth because I was chewing gum and he could hear it. Never said a word to me. I didn't even realize I was doing it. Maybe be an adult and let someone know next time instead of threatening them on social media like a little bee. The folks driving you are people, too. I was the passenger for this one, but I've been freaking mortified ever since, so I'm gonna put it on the internet to make the memory less powerful. So, I had a miscarriage 5 days earlier, and I was resolutely continuing with my life because not continuing with it would have involved telling people why I needed to take a few days. And I just really didn't want to because I hadn't even disclosed that I was pregnant in the first place. So I was Ubering to work in my numb emotional haze. The driver had this aggressively Christian music playing, which was fine, until one of the songs got really into babies. It was something like, "Baby Jesus is the holiest thing ever and you've just got to love him, with his little feet and his little face and his innocence and all this pure love in your heart because baby." So I, somewhat frantically cause I'm half a degree away from bawling my eyes out in this Uber, go, "Sorry, can you change the station?" And the driver goes, "Why? I just really need you to change the station. Do you not like Christian music? Please just change the station." So she changes the station and gives me a weird look, and for like 2 seconds I'm taking deep breaths and thinking, okay, this is fine. I can keep it together. I can contain this situation to just that one time I gave a ride to a panicked atheist, as far as she's concerned. And then I went ahead and cried my freaking eyes out anyway, while the driver gave me a rather alarmed look, and her perception of the situation probably became that one time I gave a ride to an atheist who might need an exorcism. IDK, she didn't ask, so I just stumbled out of the car and went to work with no more words exchanged between us. And then, when I was coming home from work, I got the same driver again, and I got in the car and she immediately turned the radio off and drove me home in complete silence. I had a carpool ride one time in which a Hindi, Pakistani, and Israeli man had a very intense conversation about the political climate between their countries. No, they weren't fighting or anything like that. They had a perfectly calm yet very deep intense conversation about their views on each other's race, and the divide that happens between the Hindi and Muslim cultures and Yiddish, Hebrew, and Muslim cultures. I gotta tell you, man, I've seen and experienced this before. But to be that close to people talking about their differences, discovering holy crap they're not that different, and seeing the different viewpoints put such a light on those conflicts. As far as I know, those gentlemen didn't know each other. I dropped them at different locations for different companies, and I doubt I'll ever see any of them again, but that small window of a 20-minute conversation confirmed now more than ever. If you take out the venom and vim of racial ties, then you're just left with people who want problems solved, and people who are just searching for some understanding. So, thank you Abib, Amir, and Yusuf. You guys were some awesome cats. Not a driver but had a mate pull up the handbrake in a moving taxi last week after a big night out. Thought it'd be hilarious to do a runner straight after it came screeching to a stop. Guess who left their iPhone with a special wallet case sitting on the seat? This is so fricked up. I rolled a car a few years ago because someone pulled the handbrake as I was going around a corner on loose gravel. Please tell your friend that it is a very dangerous thing to do. I was once making small talk with my Lyft driver and asked him if he ever had a weird experiences as a driver. He got all excited and starts telling me in great detail how he fingered a girl. It was so extreme that it was a little disturbing. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.